is going to be talking with us, and there he is. And he is a fields specialist. So he's going to talk to us about what burns, what doesn't.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nate, for coming.
Absolutely.
Okay. Pardon me. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Nathan Hallam, field specialist for the U.S. Wildland Fire Service, stationed out of Rocky Mountain National Park. For some of you probably wondering who the U.S. Wildland Fire Service is, newly established wildland firefighting organization for all the Department of Interior. So we serve the National Park Service, U.S. Wildland, the Fish and Wildlife Service, Bureau of Indian Affairs, and then we also have the Bureau of Land Management. Within that, we also serve the Bureau of Reclamation Lands and other federal lands under the DOI. So with that, that's going to be beneficial for future projects that we're doing here around Rocky, because some of you probably know about the Bureau of Reclamation Land that we have up at East Portal and Mary Lake, and we have fuels treatments there and piles that have been needing to get burned for years. So now we'll be able to get those under treatment and start working on those. But kind of a little bit about me. I've been in wildland fire now for 27 years. I started in 1998 when I was 18 years old. Worked for the Bureau of Indian Affairs in Oklahoma. And then from there, transferred to the Boise National Forest. Worked about 10 years there within the Boise. I worked on repel ships, hot shots, did fuel treatments, engine captain. And then in 2007, after a really big fire year there, 500,000 acres burned, I was like, where's a place that doesn't burn? And I heard that Arapahoe Roosevelt was the asbestos forest, never burned. So I was like, okay, I want to move there. So my family and I moved here in 2008, and unfortunately we brought fire with us, or fire had always been here. It just increased shortly thereafter. So with that, I worked in actually mostly in the Poudre Canyon from 2008 until 2018. So I spent 10 years putting out fires in the Poudre Canyon. And then unfortunately watched all those fires that we put out burn during Camera Peak. And then also fought fires over on the West Slope and watched a lot of those fires burn up during East Charleston. Fuel treatment stuff, the reason I'm so heavily involved in that, I think goes back to my childhood. I grew up in the Ozarks, so fire was a very different culture there. My meemaw burned the backyard every year to kill ticks and to increase forage for the grasslands. So it was a little bit different. Fire was not as big a scary creature where I grew up. It was more the culture where I grew up. Moving out west though, a totally different thing. Boise National Forest is very regimented. 10 a.m. policy was still big there. So fuels treatments was really tough. But fire eventually took over, right? I think 50 fire new starts in one night we had on the Boise in 2007. And it consumed most of the forest. So a lot of lodgepole. With that though, going into fuels treatments, so I moved to the Arapahoe Roosevelt in 08, like I said, but was heavily involved in a lot of the treatments that we did in the Poudre Canyon, and then down on the Forsyth burn that we had on the Boulder Ranger District. So really heavily involved, and my big thing is I work operations on one of the Rocky Mountain Incident Management teams, and we really look for fuels treatments when we're looking at where we're gonna put firefighters. Because those areas are safer for our firefighters to get engaged and actually start putting, successful operations on the ground. And somebody asked earlier, why don't we manage fires more? And a lot of it comes down to the risk. The risk not only to the firefighters, but to your public, to your community, and the values. So a lot of that comes to full suppression because we don't know what the long-term severity will be of these wildfires if we do allow them to spread. So we have areas on the forest within the park that maybe we can manage something. But for the most part, on the east side of the divide here, we gotta start getting fuels treatments into place to buffer the community. The Estes Park is what we're looking to do. So that way we can allow fire to freely roam west of that, up in the higher montane that only burns every, we heard 100 to 300 years. So it's gonna take a little bit to get that buffered out on the east side, so we can start letting that area actually let fire do its thing. The other thing for the fuels treatments that really bring me a passion to it is the ecological benefits. So you probably have seen what we've been doing up in the park. We burned beaver meadows and headquarters in the last couple of years. Not only did that create a buffer for your community, for future wildfires that could potentially come through that area. But the benefits to the ecosystem, the amount of wildlife that you saw in there after we burned, I mean, the elk were hanging out in it constantly, the deer. You have the lilies coming back in areas that we hadn't seen in years prior. So there's a lot of benefits to fire that we see out there when we do it on a lower to moderate broadcast burn versus on a higher severity wildfire situation. So a little bit of a background on myself, where I am, what brought me to here, and then really the operational side of things is the big piece, because if we don't get these treatments done ahead of the big burn, the big wildfire scenario is going to create catastrophic events in your community. Loss of watersheds, loss of community, things of that nature. So what we're looking at now is the Front Country Broadcast RX. This encompasses about 1,800 acres that we're looking to be burning within Rocky Mountain National Park. And I'll zoom in on it a little bit closer here for you shortly. What we've accomplished so far is about 300 acres since I've been at Rocky, but we're going to continue to burn every fall and spring when conditions allow. Obviously this spring, no bueno, right? It was not a good winter, not a good spring for broadcast burning. So we canceled all of our burning for this spring. This winter, we'll talk more about pile burning. We just didn't have the appropriate snow conditions as well for pile burning. So we're kind of at a standstill, but waiting for that more appropriate condition for the burning. I'm going to zoom in on this so you can get a little better look at it. But this is like our 5-year strategy that we're looking at for broadcast burning in Rocky Mountain National Park. And this is just the beginning. So you can see down here at the lower end, we have the headquarters burn. That's where we started in the fall of 2024. We burned about 100 acres there. You got the Beaver Meadows Visitor Center here to the east, and then we burned south of the highway, all the way up to the Bear Lake turnoff. So that was our first entry, burning right off the beginning of the headquarters. And it's quite the challenge. You think, oh, what all goes into a daily broadcast burn? And it's not me just waking up and shaking the magic 8-ball and deciding whether or not it's going to happen. There's a lot of processes that go into it. So it's long-term forecasting, communicating with the National Weather Service. We're also talking to our local fire ecologists. What are the fuels conditions on the ground? So we're pulling fuel samples from out there to see what the drought conditions are, or what the severity of fire conditions will be when we burn. So there's a lot that goes into these broadcast burns. So in 2024, there's also the cultural portion of it, right? There's a lot of history that goes into this right around the headquarters. We also have a new water treatment system going in. So there's a lot of coordination to work through that. The other thing is your smoke. What smoke are we going to be producing whenever we burn? And where is that smoke going to go? Because we don't want to impact anybody with smoke too heavily, because that could affect health for the community, right? So there is a happy medium there. So we're looking communication with the National Weather Service. What is our ventilation for the day? Meaning, how high up is that smoke going to go before it starts to disperse? And then what is it going to do at night? So we put out smoke monitors to kind of see how thick the smoke gets, or how thick the particulate gets in your community overnight. So that way we can minimize the exposure for you all. So we completed the headquarters that first year. We kind of fine-tuned things after that. And then we jumped in over this last fall, you've probably seen, where we did the Beaver Meadows. So this is about 300 acres of broadcast burning we accomplished there. The last time that was burned was, I believe, in 2006, I believe, was the last time. So it's been quite a while. The other thing you'll see when you go out there and look at that burn, we try to create a mosaic. So you all were talking about mosaics earlier. Mosaics are ideal in most of our ponderosa, like upper, lower montane, middle montane forest. For the brush component, especially for wildlife, so we got birds that migrate through, right? So we want to maintain some sort of brush component for their habitat. We also want to open it up for extra browse for the wildlife. But we also need to burn more acreage a year, so that way the wildlife doesn't browse it to the point that it's bare dirt. So that's the other issues that we've seen with past prescribed burns. I think it was in 2018 that they burned about 30 acres down here near the headquarters. What that does is that you just increase the host per acre. Just think of it like a feedlot with cattle. If we burn only 30 acres and we have all these elk and deer out there, they love our burn areas because it creates a lush new green grass. All those deer and elk will just run to that fresh new area that we burn, and they'll graze it to the point that it's nothing but cheatgrass. And then we gotta spray it. So the more acreage we can burn in a year or in one setting, that's less hose per acre essentially, less impact from our wildlife. With a lot of steps that go into the broadcast burning portion, a lot of things that we're looking at long term, but the overall objective for it is the overall benefit of your community for catastrophic wildfires. East Troublesome coming down. How are we gonna stop that? It's these broadcast burns that we're doing on the ground. So that's what we're looking at here, looking at future years. So what we were looking at this spring for burning, we have the Eagle Cliff. So you all are probably familiar with where Eagle Cliff is. We got the park headquarters here. Eagle Cliff is about 300 acres. The last time this was burned is in the 70s. So the last time we had fire up on this slope. We have it all divided up now, and with Alpine House Module 3.1, we have all the hand lines in place, but we just didn't get the conditions to burn it this spring. This next fall though, if we wind up getting out of the drought, things start to moderate, we will start chipping away at Eagle Cliff. And we'll start knocking out this area through here. Starting with south-facing slope, because that's more of an easier, less complex area to burn on south-facing with less fuels. Working our way over on the northeast side, we got a little bit of moderate fuel loading in there. And then the last but final piece will be on the northwest-facing slope of Eagle Cliff. Whenever you drive in, you'll see there's a pretty heavy pocket of a lodgepole. There's quite a bit of dead and down. So we want to make sure that we burn everything around that first before we actually look at burning that heavier timber. Because that's going to put out quite a bit of heat. You're going to see some mortality up there, but that's going to be more like the natural Montana fire that's going to happen. But for that to happen, we got to secure it all around the edge first. So that's what we're looking at for next fall is Eagle Cliff. Moving on down to South Lateral Moraine. So you all might be familiar with some of the burning that happened down here years ago. I believe this was in 2008. They burned east of the Bear Lake Road here, just adjacent to the YMCA. What we're looking at for 2027 or 2028 fiscal years is all this is South Lateral Moraine. We will burn the south-facing aspect first. So that'll be about 350 acres. The north-facing aspect, we need to come into it first and start doing a little more fuels treatments. So you'll see on a lot of your north-facing slopes throughout northern Colorado, you have a substantial amount of dead and down. Fire's been excluded from those areas for so long that the only way that we can put fire back into it is we need to go in and cut, pile it, burn the piles, and then we can come back in and actually put fire on the ground. If we try to put fire on the ground in that sort of fuel type currently without piling burning it first, we're going to put up so much mortality, it won't be anywhere near historic. So we got to slowly start putting fuel treatments back into those north-facing slopes. The other thing is, whenever you start getting into your lodgepole component or north-facing slopes, it's either on or off, meaning it won't burn at all, or it's going to burn everything. So it is a very fine line to be able to burn those areas and safely do it on north-facing slopes without actually reducing the fuel loading first. So South Lateral Maine, fiscal year 27-28. You will see out here we have Moraine Park. Moraine Park is actually going to be pulled from the broadcast burning because they just came out with the new watershed restoration with putting in like the man-made beaver ponds. So that's going to create its own natural fuel break with those beaver ponds, but it's going to flood essentially a lot of Moraine Park. So we may come back in and look into fuel treatments in that later, but we're going to let them get that watershed restoration stuff done first. Moving on further north, when you start looking at North Lateral Moraine, it's kind of the last piece. We got some fuel treatments that we got to do in there first. All this north-facing slope needs to be treated first with cut and pile. Then we can come in and start burning through here. Starting south-facing slope and working our way around. That's essentially the next 4-year plan for Rocky, and then it becomes cyclical. We start right back over. Headquarters burn, Beaver Meadows, and it's just a 5-year rotation for the burning of this. To keep it kind of close to that historical regime, but also temper the fuels to the point that we don't have to worry about catastrophic fire coming through here and burning into the community, or coming out of the community and burning into the park. And then also maintaining the benefits for the wildlife ecosystem as well. So we don't, the other piece is the treatment. So we all probably heard of cheatgrass, right? We all got it in our yards. So we are doing pre and post treatments for cheatgrass within our prescribed burns to try to keep the native species vigilant within that area. And then we start talking about broadcast burning. What is it that I am held by legally for broadcast burning? So I've been your burn boss for a number of years around here. We have what's called a burn plan that has a multitude of elements within it. But the one thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is the limitations that we have within our burning. And the limitations are in place, that way we don't let things get out of control. So whenever we look at our burn prescription, we have eye level wind speed. So that is what I'm seeing right at my face, right? So when we look at our high end, eye level wind speed, 5 miles per hour, 1 hour field moistures, and those are our dead. So the dead grass on the ground would be a 1 hour field moisture of 3%. Relative humidity 16% in any wind direction. That'd be like our high end. Ideal is 7 miles per hour, low end. So you kind of see how we have to work within that. A lot of you are like, well, without that, outside that wind threshold, potentially the day that I was burning at your house. Understand it's different at your house than it is where I'm burning. So there are different conditions. The terrain influences wind, that it can be stronger up on a ridgetop than it is where we're burning at on this slope. So yeah, just take that into a peace of mind whenever you see like, oh, it's really windy here today. Why are they burning? Conditions are different where we're at on the ground. We have fire operations specialists going around collecting wind observations, weather observations. We also have a meteorologist usually on scene with us when we're burning from Boulder National Weather Service. So we're taking this very seriously. It's not just me trying to figure it all out by myself. We're bringing in specialists to define all this. The other thing that I've learned over the years is we've always nickeled and dimed our prescribed burns in the past. They were all based off of a funding code, and you had very little funding. So we wound up treating prescribed fires very differently than we do wildfires. And so for myself, working in operations, I started thinking about it differently, especially with the amount of values that we have around here. And we've instituted the new, more of a like treating prescribed fire like wildfire. So even though the behave models, so the computer models that show how many resources that need to be on the ground on these conditions may say we only need 4 engines out there. And that's all it says for like burning up here in Rocky is 4 engines. I don't feel confident or safe enough to only burn that with 4 engines out there if I treat it like a wildfire. So we order up all of our local partners to come help us. Anybody that wants to come help, they join us. So we had close to 7 engines out there. We had 45 personnel, double the amount of personnel needed for what the computer models say, but the appropriate amount of personnel for what I would think is you all would want out there on the ground and what we need if we were to get a spot fire. So treating prescribed fire more like wildfire with the way we operate on the ground is going to reduce the amount or the probability of escape. And that's what's been the issue with a lot of our escape prescribed burns in the past, is we've been cut by budget to a certain amount, so we can only have so many resources out there. The other thing that we've changed is overnight staffing. So we've all heard of escape burns. A lot of them do happen overnight. The other thing that we have around here is the Chinook winds that surface never know when. So what we've done is instituted a way to overnight staff on the burns. So if our relative humidities get up to 50%, and you actually see that while on the ground, and you make a phone call to the National Weather Service and there's no forecasted winds of access through the night, and we have the perimeter of the fire contained, meaning that there's no chance for the fire to creep outside of the lines that we have, then we do not need to have overnight staffing. But if the relative humidities never drop below never get above 50%, or if you have a high wind event forecasted, or if you don't have the outside perimeter of the fire secured, we will have resources out there throughout the night. So that's one thing that we change as well. And hopefully that helps make people feel a little safer with what we're doing. Let's see here. What else? So the other thing is pile burning. So I was talking to you earlier, a lot of this stuff we're not able to do any sort of broadcast burning until we get the piles out of it first. So you can see here, we spent a lot of time in the winter burning piles, except for this last winter. We did not have any snow, so we did not get any accomplishment done there. So we're looking at our pile burn units, and I'll zoom in here shortly so you can see where those are located. But I'm happy to say that we have accomplished Thunder Mountain. I'll zoom in here. And you all might be familiar with where Thunder Mountain is, but this is the East Portal Campground, right here near the water source you see. They started in there about 3 weeks ago. 122 acres cut and piled in 2 weeks. Amazing crew. So they got all that done last Friday, and we're paying out the contract on Monday. So the invoice is done on that. So we have 122 acres worth of piles now that we need to burn. That means overall, I've calculated all of Rocky Mountain National Park, all of our piles that we have remaining, we have close to 25,000 piles on the ground. And that's scattered between here down to Allen's Park. Now, last year, on a wet year, we burned 15,000 piles in one winter. So the average year, we can knock out the piles. So, but this last winter, we didn't get the snow. So what am I looking at? How are we gonna get rid of these piles if we continue to not have the snow? We all know we usually have a wet monsoon in June. So we may start looking at burning piles along private property boundaries in June. Now, we won't be burning the scale that we do in the wintertime. We won't be going out and burning 1,000 piles in a day. But we may go out and burn 100 piles in a day along a private property boundary. And what that does is help create a buffer, because we want to get those piles off the landscape, especially where they border you all, in case we do have a wildfire this summer that comes into those piles. We don't create intensity from our piles going onto private. We actually have a place to catch it before it gets onto your private. So these piles, we want to get them off the landscape as quickly as we can. If we leave them out there too long, they could become a nuisance for us in a wildfire situation. And we've seen this on the Alexander fire. We also seen it on the Cold Springs fire up around Netherland a few years ago, where when wildfire gets into piles, it goes pile to pile. And it sounds pretty aggressive, it looks pretty aggressive, and it's hard for firefighters to put out. So we want to get the piles off the landscape. The other piece, we do have some piles left, and I'll kind of go through all these here. So we'll start up north. Deer Mountain, the dark greens where we have piles left, or I'm sorry, the light greens where we have piles left. And then this dark shade over here along the private property boundary, we have some left as well. Eagle Cliff, where we're looking at broadcast burn, we did create some piles up on top of the slope there to reduce the fuel loading before we broadcast burn it. So essentially we'll burn those piles out, and that'll reduce the potential for spotting coming out from the Eagle Cliff onto private property. Thunder Mountain, something very unique that we did this year, we cut and piled everything before trees actually greened up, before the actual bloom happened. So all that fuel is going to be available to burn this next winter. If we cut it during the summertime, the live fuel moisture out there would be about 130%. And it would take a whole summer and next year before we could burn it. Because we cut it while it was dormant and piled it, it should cure out this summer and be available next winter to burn. So one change that we did, took an opportunity for the drought and actually cut and piled earlier than I've ever seen. So we got the piles at Eagle Cliff. Moving on down, looking at Lily Lake. Lily Lake, we have some new piles that were cut this last year, about 120 acres here. So we got to get those piles burned as well. And then we have a bunch of scabby old piles along the drainage bottom that we need to get burned just west of Lily Lake. So there's not a whole lot left in there, but there are a few piles from past treatments we got to get knocked out. Moving on down, Allen's Park. So here's the big problem area that I see in the future is Wild Basin. Has anybody been up Wild Basin Road? Probably seen what kind of conditions we got up in there. There's a lot of dead and down in there. It's been excluded from fire from a long time. So we got a lot of work to do down here, but we have these piles that we need to accomplish burning down here. But I'm gonna start telling you all the future of Rocky. So here's the next 5-year plan moving forward. Is we're looking to cut and pile all the way from Wild Basin
5 minutes.
all the way to Lily Lake along the private property boundary. It's gonna be about 2,000 acres. We're looking 1/2 mile in off the private property boundary. With that though, it won't be a straight line. You won't be able to see it from the road as easily as some of the previous cuts. We'll try to do some sort of mosaic with that line as we come up through here. But we gotta harden this whole eastern edge before we get a fire come down out of Wild Basin and it comes across and it destroys the entire watershed. We're well behind service in here. So you're gonna see a lot more work in Wild Basin. We got a great opportunity for south-facing aspect burning along Wild Basin as well. So on the north side of the drainage, south-facing aspect, wintertime, this north-facing slope, you can see this knife ridge here. So everything north of that knife ridge will hold snow in the wintertime. We can burn this south-facing slope through the wintertime if conditions allow, if we're out of a drought. But we first gotta get the piles cut along the private property boundary. That way if something were to spot, we can catch it before it gets on the private. All right, so, let me exit out of that. So really my goal and the goal of the Wildland Fire Service is establishing healthy fire back on the landscape. And that's the same with the US Forest Service as well. What is healthy fire? For me, in the low to high montane forest, is like low to moderate fire intensity. How do we put that back on the landscape? I cannot put high intensity fire on the landscape around this country. There's too many values of threat. But we can put low to moderate intensity fire out there with the right resources and with the right staff on the ground. The other thing with that is just gonna harden your community in the future. So that, if we get a wildfire in the countryside here, we can actually feel safer in the community at Estes. Maybe we don't have to urge the need for evacuations. Maybe we can actually slow the roll and get people out of here a little more methodically versus in these troublesome situation where it's come romping down the hill and everybody must flee. So that's all I have for the fuel specialist side of things here at Rocky Mountain National Park. Understand, I also cover Florissant fossil beds. I also cover sand dunes for all the fuels treatments as well. And I just spent the last week over in Dinosaur. I do live here, or not, I live in Fort Collins, but I work here on Estes Park. And you guys are the main community that all of my efforts are going into as far as fuels treatment. So hopefully what I'm doing out there is what you all are liking to see. If you'd like to see changes though, please let me know after this. I'd be happy to hear what you have to say. Thank you.